Dr. Elias Warren arrived at Hollow Sanatorium on a stormy evening, his coat heavy with rain. The institution, perched on a remote island, loomed ahead, its Gothic architecture clawing at the sky. He had been sent to evaluate a patient, a woman named Lillian Graves, who had vanished from a locked room for 3 days and then mysteriously reappeared, claiming she had never left. Dr. Warren had heard whispers about Hollow before, the odd disappearances, the shifting corridors, the patients who spoke in riddles. But he was a man of logic, sent here to diagnose and explain, not to entertain superstitions. Dr. Adler, the head psychiatrist, greeted him with a wary expression. "Lillian is unique," he admitted as they walked through dimly lit hallways. "She believes she isn't a patient here. Claims we've made a terrible mistake." Warren frowned. "Delusions of persecution? Perhaps." Adler hesitated. "But then there's this." He handed Warren a file. Inside were pictures of Lillian from a decade ago, except they were labeled with a different name. And yet, the woman in the images was undeniably her, unchanged by time. "Who took these?" Warren asked, unsettled. Adler exhaled. "We don't know." Lillian sat cross-legged in a stark white room, her dark eyes unreadable. "You're not supposed to be here," she said as soon as Warren entered. He froze. "I'm here to help you, Lillian." She tilted her head. "Is that my name today?" He studied her, noting the steadiness in her voice, the clarity in her gaze. "You claim you aren't a patient here?" "I know I'm not." She leaned forward. "Neither are you." A chill crept down Warren's spine. "I was sent here to evaluate you." She gave a sad smile. "That's what they want you to believe." Warren glanced at his notes. "You disappeared for 3 days. Where did you go?" She let out a soft laugh. "I never left." "You were found outside the gates," Warren pressed. "The entire island was searched." She shook her head. "No. They just thought they searched. This place, it's not real the way you think it is." His patience thinned. "Lillian, delusions often feel real." "But you have to trust me." She leaned in, her voice barely above a whisper. "What year is it?" Warren blinked. 2025. She held his gaze. "Check your reflection." Something about the way she said it unnerved him. He turned slightly, glancing at the polished metal table's surface. The distorted reflection stared back, but something was off. His hair looked wrong, too short. His face slightly thinner than he remembered. Creeping unease coiled in his stomach. Over the next few days, Warren studied Lillian's records. But the deeper he dug, the more contradictions surfaced. Her admittance papers were incomplete. No family contacts. No medical history. And then there were the photographs. Not just the ones Adler had shown him, but others, dozens, hidden in old files. They dated back over 50 years, but in every single one, Lillian looked the same. No aging. No change. Impossible. He confronted Adler. "Who is she?" Adler's face darkened. "You need to stop looking. What aren't you telling me?" Adler sighed. "This place does things to the mind. It erases, rearranges." Warren clenched his fists. "That's not an answer." Adler hesitated. "If you keep digging, you won't like what you find." That night, Warren dreamed of the ocean. He stood at the island's cliffs, staring at the churning waves below. He wasn't alone. Lillian was beside him, whispering something he couldn't quite hear. Then he was falling. Warren woke with a start, sweat drenching his skin. Something wasn't right. His name felt foreign on his tongue. His memories, his life before this felt slippery. He needed proof of who he was. He searched his pockets, his briefcase, but there was nothing personal. No ID. No driver's license. His mind raced. He ran to the nearest mirror. And then he saw it. His reflection didn't match his memories. His face was slightly different. Younger. A scar he distinctly remembered having since childhood was missing. His pulse pounded in his ears. Was he losing his mind? Or was Lillian right? He found her in her room, waiting. "You remember now, don't you?" she said softly. Warren swallowed hard. "Who am I?" She hesitated, then whispered, "You're a patient." The world tilted. "No." "Yes," she said, eyes glistening with something like pity. "You've been here for years." "But the island, it resets you. Again and again. Every time you start to remember, they rewrite you." His breath came in shallow gasps. "No, that's not." She reached out, pressing something cold into his palm. "A key." "The basement," she urged. "Find your file. Find yourself." Hard hammering, Warren made his way through the labyrinthine hallways. The basement was locked, but the key fit perfectly. Inside, the air was damp, thick with the scent of mold and decay. Rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness. He found the W section and scanned the names. And then his fingers froze. Warren Elias, admitted 1998. Trembling, he pulled out the file. Inside were pages of evaluations, treatments, erased memories. The final page was a single photograph. Him, standing on the cliffs. A doctor stood beside him. Dr. Adler. The caption beneath read, "Final session before reset. Subject believes he is a visiting psychiatrist. Cycle 37. Warren staggered back, bile rising in his throat. The walls seemed to close in. A sound behind him. He turned. Dr. Adler stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 orderlies. "You weren't supposed to find that," Adler said, voice full of regret. The orderlies moved forward. Warren bolted, sprinting through the basement, clutching the file to his chest. He had to get to Lillian. He had to escape. A sharp pain bloomed in his neck. Darkness swallowed him. Dr. Elias Warren arrived at Hollow Sanatorium on a stormy evening, his coat heavy with rain. The institution loomed ahead. He had been sent to evaluate a patient, a woman named Lillian Graves. Dr. Elias Warren woke in a pristine white room. The air smelled sterile, like antiseptic and something faintly metallic. His head throbbed, and his limbs felt heavy, as though he had been asleep for days. A voice cut through the haze. "You shouldn't have run." He turned his head. Dr. Adler sat across from him, clipboard in hand. His expression was unreadable. Warren licked his dry lips. "What happened?" Adler exhaled. "You had an episode. A severe break from reality." He gestured to the room. "We had to sedate you." Panic flared in Warren's chest. "That's not." He sat up too quickly, dizziness nearly knocking him back. Adler leaned forward. "Elias, listen to me. This has happened before. Many times." "No." Warren shook his head, gripping the sheets. "I'm not a patient." Adler slid a file toward him. His file. "Read it," Adler said gently. With shaking fingers, Warren flipped through the pages. They detailed years of treatment, multiple resets, and a deeply ingrained delusion, his belief that he was a visiting psychiatrist. "No," he whispered. "This isn't real." Adler sighed. Denial is expected at this stage. Warren clenched his fists. Lillian Graves was discharged a decade ago," Adler said. "She recovered. She left." The words sent a jolt of confusion through him. "That's not possible. I saw her. I spoke to her." Adler folded his hands. "You've created an avatar, Elias. A personification of your fractured psyche. She isn't real." "No." His voice trembled. "She gave me the key." Adler's gaze softened. There was no key. A hollow dread coiled in Warren's stomach. "Then what's in the basement?" Adler paused, considering him carefully. Then he stood, moving toward the door. Before leaving, he looked back. If you're certain this isn't real, I won't stop you from proving it. The door clicked shut behind him. Warren wasted no time. As soon as he was sure he was alone, he moved. His limbs were sluggish, weighed down by whatever sedative they had given him, but his mind buzzed with urgency. The hallways of Hollow Sanatorium twisted like veins, unfamiliar despite his supposed years here. The basement door was exactly where he remembered it, unlocked. It almost felt too easy. He pushed the thought aside and stepped inside. The air was thick with decay. He followed the rows of filing cabinets until he reached the W section. His fingers trembled as he pulled open the drawer, but his file was gone. His breath hitched. A sound behind him. He turned, pulse hammering. Lillian stood in the doorway. She was exactly as he remembered her. Dark eyes, sharp gaze. Unchanged. "I told you," she said softly. Warren's vision swam. "They said you're not real." She tilted her head. "What do you believe?" He swallowed hard. "I don't know anymore." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "They're watching." "Who?" "The orderlies." "Adler." She exhaled shakily. "The island." His mind spun. "The island?" She grabbed his wrist, her grip ice cold. "It feeds on us. We never leave because we can't." The room seemed to darken. A low hum vibrated through the walls. Warren felt something shift inside him, like a missing piece snapping into place. Memories surfaced, fragmented but vivid. He had been here before. He had tried to escape. And every time they had reset him. Adler's words echoed in his head. This has happened before. Many times. A rush of nausea hit him. "I need to get out," Warren whispered. Lillian's grip tightened. "Then don't let them take you again." Footsteps echoed down the hall. Lillian's eyes widened. "Run!" Warren sprinted, heart pounding. The walls seemed to warp, stretching impossibly long. He reached a locked door at the end of the hallway. The exit. He fumbled at the handle, locked. A hand clamped onto his shoulder. He spun, ready to fight Dr. Adler. But he wasn't alone. Lillian stood beside him. She looked different. Her posture was rigid, her expression eerily blank. She wore a hospital gown now, and her eyes were empty. Something inside Warren cracked. Adler's voice was calm. "You're trapped in your delusion, Elias." Warren's pulse roared in his ears. "She's not real. Or she is." Or his breath hitched. The room wavered, flickering between two versions, the cold, sterile walls of a psychiatric facility, the damp, rotting corridors of something ancient, alive. Two realities. Two versions of the truth. Adler spoke again, gently. "If you step through that door, you'll never come back." Warren's hand trembled on the handle. He looked at Lillian. Her lips parted, forming a silent word. "Run." Warren squeezed his eyes shut. When he opened them, the door was open. Darkness beyond it. A void. A way out. Or something else entirely. Adler's voice was distant now. "Stay and we can help you." Warren took a slow, shuddering breath. He had to choose. Step into the unknown. Or stay in the safety of the lie. His fingers tightened around the handle. And then blackness.
That's it for tonight's tale. But don't worry, there's always more where that came from. Be sure to stay tuned for even more nerve-thrilling horror stories every single week. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and join us here at the Hollow Horror. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Until then, stay safe. Or stay scared. See you next time.